Welcome to Find the Way with Dr. Mike Sherbino. Find the Way is your program helping you find hope for this road called life. This is a program that addresses the issues of life by understanding where God is in the midst of it all. So join us for the next half hour to regain perspective, purpose, and passion for the journey you are on today. Last week we talked about reading between the lines. Mike, where are we headed on today's show?
Well, today we want to pick up in this same passage that we're looking at in the Bible in Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus talked about, last week we read, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And we talked about the deceptive things that we give ourselves to, and yet we end up feeling so empty. One of the other things that just robs us so much of life is worry. There's not a person listening today who hasn't worried, or maybe they're worrying over something. I could be prone to worry about what I'm going to say next, but we want to unpack the subject of worry. And today, we want to invite our listeners to know that we're a brand new program. It's called Find the Way. You can find us on the web, findtheway.faith. You can listen to us. You can watch it online. Or you can sign up and be part of our daily broadcast where we're going to upload what's called Mike's Minute. It's a video blog, 1 minute long, of inspiration. Lots of neat things happening, but we're excited to be broadcasting, not all across Canada, but
from Vancouver all the way to Manitoba.
Yeah, that's cool. So hi to all our friends out there in Winnipeg and Vancouver, Calgary, Saskatoon, and even in Moose Jaw. So that's where it all ends and begins, right there in Moose Jaw. We're glad you're with us today. Right now, we're going to take a moment. We're going to listen to Hillsong Worship as they sing the incredible song that Christ is enough. Is he enough for you? Is he enough for the fact when you start to worry? Is Jesus really enough for what you're going through? Let's listen to that song right now.
Christ is my reward and all my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy.
Well, welcome back to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbino, and with me is Ashley Sherbino in the studio today. We're really glad to be sharing with you as we talk about the audacity of Jesus when he actually said, "Don't worry."
You know, that makes me think about last week when someone turned to me and said, "You're worried about that? What's the big deal? And worrying isn't going to help anyway." You know, that really ticked me off. I was actually getting ready to slug the guy, to be completely honest, because to me, this was a big deal and something I was really...
And he was minimizing it. He was making fun of it.
Yeah, he wasn't understanding what was actually going on.
And we often want to look at me and say, "You're worried about that? Come on."
Yeah, you think that's bad. I'm going to tell you what's happening with me.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Anyways, let me tell you what Jesus had to say about that. And then, Ashley, I want to come back and have you comment on it today. Jesus had these words to say in Matthew chapter 6, verse 25, the audacity of Jesus. Therefore, he says, I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? And then he says, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And who of you by worrying can even add a single hour to his life? Why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They don't labor or spin. And then he says, I tell you that not even Solomon. And Solomon was, they say, the wisest man who ever lived, the third king in Israel. Solomon, all his splendor, was dressed like one of these. That's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown in the fire. He says, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Now, I don't know, as you're listening today to the program, whether you believe in Jesus or whether you don't, or you're kind of saying, I don't know, it's kind of up for grabs. But the fact that he would be so audacious to say, if your trust is in me, you don't have to worry, I hope will keep you listening with us for the next 25 minutes as we unpack all of this together. And I'm glad, Ashley, that you're here today. So how do you process worry?
Well, worry, even if you break that down into something like anxiety, this is something that plagues our society. No one can say that they've never had an ounce of worry, that they've never had a moment of fear or concern or anxiety. It's something that we're experiencing all the time, for sure.
Now, here's something out of your background, because you've been a spokesperson for the Canadian Mental Health, amongst many other things. You've been a pastor. You've done a lot of things in a short time. You're a fundraiser, doing different things. But as a spokesperson for Canadian Mental Health, we almost want to place that as a stigma on people. But we all struggle with varying levels of mental wellness, don't we?
Absolutely. And like I said, anxiety is a big issue in our society. We're even actually just seeing the Bell Let's Talk Day, which is motivated by this whole thing of mental wellness that you're talking on. Clara Hughes just did a ride through Canada talking about her struggle with mental health issues and dealing with depression and anxiety in her life as well. So I spent a lot of my time in schools working with teachers and young children that had anxiety, going into workplaces and saying, how can you build a sense of mental wellness here to help people? Because essentially we're looking at the worry in our lives and what happens when the worry multiplies even to a much greater level.
Well, that's an interesting observation, because they've often said that, fog, which can encompass a whole city or block, actually comes out of just a small amount of water. It just grows and grows and grows. And many times something, we start to worry about just a little bit, and then somebody says, oh, did you hear this? Or what about that? Or we can read the news and just be devastated, and the anxiety meter just is kind of going through the moon, and our blood pressure is just skyrocketing as well.
You use such a great analogy with fog. It's like fear. You can just have a little bit of fear, but fear is a multiplier, and then it starts to take over everything and color the way you're seeing the world, the way you're seeing your life.
Jesus talked about some pretty basic things, and he's not making fun of us. I think we have to understand that, but he's saying, why are you worrying? And if we take Jesus out of the equation, we can perhaps have a fatalist mindset that says, well, this life is all that there is, so I'm just going to live it, and when it's over, it's over. But it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to live that way. Jesus comes and he says, I'm telling you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or your body, what you will even wear. Having been the father, and I still am the father of 5 daughters, I have realized that, sometimes what borders on a cataclysmic explosion and the world falling apart is, what am I going to wear today? Jesus, I think, understood all that, didn't he? When is he poking fun at us or what?
Yeah, I think he's saying these are the things that people are talking about. So much of the worry that the people in those days, what they were faced with, the challenges, and we see similar challenges today all around us. So worry is definitely something that we have to grapple with and learn how to deal with. But what he's getting at is there's only one way you can't worry.
And what's that?
The only way you can't worry is if there's something actually more more in the sense that it can take over and overpower the worry, something greater than that.
Because worry takes over our own lives, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's that going to look like? Describe that, and what do you think is the more?
Well, what I've come to see in my life is simply put that Jesus is the more. But if I was to break that down a little bit more than that, what I would say is when you can discover love on a deep and intimate level, that love can overpower the anxiety and the fear and what's at the root of the worry.
Is that love from another person or what?
Well, I talked often in my days with mental health of just finding love in the general sense. So sometimes that can be love from another person. But that will run dry if we're just finding it in one person. They can't be the source of everything. But what if love is pouring from an ultimate source that never runs dry? That's actually who Jesus is. It's ultimate love, his connection with God the Father, that we're actually drawing on a source that will never run up.
And so that picture of love that you're talking about with Jesus, because maybe not all our listeners would understand that, the picture of God's love is that he actually sent his son into the world so that the relationship that we have that is broken with God because of our sin could be repaired. And he did that by sending Jesus. God came in the flesh to be our Savior. And a lot of people struggle with that, don't they? They don't think they need a Savior. They don't want to admit to it because we're trying to pull it all together ourselves, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You look at the issues of life, even what's coming up in the passage. What are we going to eat? What are we going to wear? Well, these are important things. I'm worried. Where am I going to sleep? I want to know I have a roof over my head. I want to know I'm going to be making money that I can pay my bills tomorrow. But what happens if we are able to strip everything away and actually say and know and believe in our hearts that if we lost everything, we still have something more, because the more is this relationship with God, an ultimate love that is greater than anything else that's around us.
So what does that look like? Does it mean just random believing that somehow we're going to get through, that we will do it, or is it believing that miraculously God's going to intervene in the situation?
Well, what if it's believing that it's actually already been done? You refer to Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross. What does that actually mean? It means that we all know we're all broken. Worry is a symptom of our brokenness.
Explain that. Maybe you're hitting too close to home now.
Well, if we lived actually believing all day long that we're secure and that we're loved, we wouldn't really be worried about much at all.
That's so true.
But that's not really the case in our day-to-day living. And so many things creep up. Someone says something to us. There's a little fear of what might be taken away. A relationship might be broken. And now all of a sudden, we're living with this sense of anxiety instead of sense of living in that deep love and that commitment.
So maybe what Jesus is talking about here is when he mentions don't worry about what you're going to wear or what you're going to eat, he's really talking about the very basics. Because if he's got the basics covered, then he's saying the rest of the stuff is just crumbs under the table. It's a no-brainer.
I don't think Jesus was saying you don't even need to work. You don't even need to care about anything in life at all. It's all irrelevant. That's actually not what he was saying.
What is he saying?
What he is saying is what you need to put your focus in and your care in is how much I love you and what I'm about to do for you. What he was about to go to the cross on behalf of these people. He was about to reconcile everything.
So how did you discover how much Jesus loved you? I mean, you just going to snap the finger and all of a sudden, magic dust appeared, or what was it?
It kind of comes back to a little what we were talking about last week. I can put my hope, and I have put my hope in so many things that have actually just crumbled around me. But what if I put my identity in something that's more? That's not something that anyone can ever take away from you. I can lose a job, but losing a job doesn't mean I lose my sense of self-worth. I can lose a house, but that doesn't mean I'm no longer a loved person that has value and has meaning and purpose in life. I can lose all these things around me that the world says are security, but if I actually have a rooted belief in something that's deeper, it's not that I'm saying it's not going to be hard, but it's not going to dismantle everything about me. You can tell the difference between a person who is grieving over certain things, upset about certain things, versus a person that is despairing because their hope was built on something that was false and crumbled.
And there's that whole sense of being deceived and being ripped off. And then what I often observe in people, and at times it's been in my own life, you get really angry. We feel like, well, I've got the shaft. And many times I don't
deserve this.
Yeah,
right?
I don't deserve this. Exactly. Or we look around and say, well, if God's really a God of love, why has this happened? And as someone said, well, why shouldn't it happen? But that's a lame answer if we believe that this life is all that there is.
And it's just based on our circumstances.
Exactly,
right?
Because if that's the case, then we feel like we've been really ripped off. Whereas God invites us through Jesus to see life from an eternal perspective, to see the bigger picture.
And for him to even say, I'm orchestrating things that you can't even grasp right now. And in the midst of everything, know how much you're loved. Even in the midst of hardship and brokenness and all of this, know that you're not alone, that I'm actually there, I'm loving you, and I'm doing something greater.
We're going to be back in just a moment with Find the Way. You can find us on findtheway.faith, and you can listen to this conversation that I've had with Ashley today. I'm going to come back and speak once again from Matthew chapter 6 on the audacity of Jesus when he said, "Don't worry." And we've been talking about the audacity of Jesus when he said, "Don't worry." But there's not a person listening today that does really not want to win over worry, yet reality tells me that in the day-to-day struggle of life, more often than not, worry wins over us. Isn't it amazing the things that we worry about? We'd be almost embarrassed to admit some of them. I mean, some people worry about what they're going to cook for dinner. It's like the world's going to fall apart. Some worry, though, that will they be able to actually eat what they have cooked. Some worry about going away for holidays. Now, I always look forward to going away for the holidays, but they worry about will their plants survive? Will their pets survive? And I saw on the net an entire article on how to take the worry out of leaving your pet for the holidays. I didn't see one on how to take the worry out of leaving your kids for the holidays, but we won't even go there. Other things that people worry about seem trivial, but they're of absolute importance to them. And then, of course, there are those who, when they have nothing to worry about, will worry about the fact that there's nothing to worry about. Could that be you today as you're listening? While it seems that very little of what we actually worry about comes to pass, it's often not much consolation to us, especially if you're going for a biopsy result, or if you're waiting for a letter from the school stating whether or not you passed, or if the whole problem of just coping with life has you completely overwhelmed and handcuffed. Worrying is something that is easier caught than taught, and no one has had to take a course on it to help improve our ability to worry. It seems we've learned it well from our parents and from society all around us. And I confess that there have been nights when I've stayed awake or have not slept well because of worry. And worry seems to come about when we fall prey to the illusion that not all the ducks are lined up in a row and what actually could happen. But the Bible actually teaches us that worry is the sin of distrust, of not trusting in the promises and the providence of God. In the eyes of the Lord, it's like a baby saying to the mother who is nursing him or her, "Will you be able to feed me later on today?" Now, for those of you listening who say, "I love Jesus, I get that," he tells us not to worry. As a matter of fact, he says the absence of worry is to be a telltale sign that you really are part of God's family. But we still worry. Ever wonder what worry is? I mean, worry is something like the midnight stalker comes out of the shadows, trailing its victim from afar. The whole time, the shadows make it appear worse than it really is, but as it gets hold of us, we find ourselves running for life. Worry can actually be best discovered if we go to its roots, and it's found in an old German word that means to strangle or to choke. Isn't that appropriate as we think of how worry chokes the life out of people, and possibly today it's been choking the life out of you? Whether truth or lie is often all that is needed to halt life. What are we worrying about? What did we hear? As I mentioned earlier in the program, I was reading that a dense fog, extensive enough to cover 7 city blocks 100 feet thick, get this, is composed of less than 1 glass of water, which is divided into 60,000 million droplets. In the right form, a few gallons of water can cripple a large city. The substance of worry is usually small, but when allowed to grow unchecked, it will cripple you. The Apostle Paul wrote to the Philippians from a jail cell, if you can believe it, that he had learned to be content in whatever state he found himself in. And so wherever you are with worry, Jesus says, don't worry. And what he's implying, when you look this up in the original language and trying to say, is there some hidden meaning? He's actually just saying, don't worry. He says, don't worry about your life. And the word life is a comprehensive term. Now, most of us buy life insurance, but to get it, you have to sign a form that you've never felt faint or dizzy or been seriously sick. They want to give protection to you, but only if you are a perfect specimen of health. Well, Jesus is speaking to those of us who are not well, who are broken, as Ashley was referring to. He says your life is all comprehensive. He wants to bring healing to every part of your life that worry has attacked, whether it's physical or spiritual or mental or emotional. He's saying don't let worry attack in any of these areas, and don't worry. In verses 25 to 27 in Matthew 6, where he says, don't worry about your life, what you eat or drink, or your body, what you wear. And then he throws out, he says, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns. And yet, in all of these things, he is saying, who can even add a single hour to their life? Jesus is saying, don't worry about the small stuff. When he says don't worry about the small stuff, I remember growing up visiting my uncle's home. I was a little kid and I saw a plaque hanging on the wall. It's funny what you remember. It was a picture of a husband speaking to his wife. Now, as a young kid, I didn't understand it, but then after I was married for a number of years, I reflected back and it all made sense. The plaque said, I'm the boss of this house, but I have my wife's permission to say so. And when we deal with worry, we have to stop for a moment and we say, who are we giving permission to anyways? And we are giving permission for that worry to come in and just take over our life. Where Jesus says, if I am really the master of your life, you don't have to worry. You see, in the times of Jesus, the master was responsible for taking care of the slave. He says, I'm going to take care of your every need. You can trust in me and you can rely on me. So when I go back to the first part of this verse, Jesus says, so therefore, he said, don't worry about your life. And there's a principle in reading through the Bible. When you see the therefore, you need to say, well, what's it there for? And it was a reference to the last paragraph where Jesus talked again about who is the master. And we talked about that last week. It says, if money is your master, then you have reason to worry, because money cannot guarantee happiness. One comedian said, if money ever talked, all it said to me was goodbye. And maybe you're in that situation today. Jesus says, though, if I'm your master, you don't have to worry. And worrying about food and drink seems like small stuff for most of us here in Canada or in the States. But for many, it is just the opposite. It's big stuff, especially if you're a Syrian refugee, especially if you're on your run for your life right now, or maybe you're in Sudan or in Somalia, and you're dealing with all sorts of natural catastrophes. In the place of Palestine where Jesus was, food and water could never be taken for granted, especially with the droughts and the intense heat. But Paul would write in Philippians 4, verse 13, he says, my God will supply all your need according to his riches in Christ Jesus. The master was expected to provide the basic needs for his workers. And so Jesus says, you can count on me. And that's why he gives the examples of the birds of the air. He says, if I provide for them, then how much more will your Father in heaven meet your need? You're probably thinking today, is it really true? You're saying, Michael, you don't know what I'm dealing with. My marriage breakup, maybe it's a problem with a child. How do I really believe that God is enough? And possibly you've had a situation where trust has been broken in your life. People have promised you things and they've let you down. Talked to a man recently. He said his wife could count on the fingers of her hand the people that she felt she could really trust because she'd been let down so many times. Maybe you have felt something the same. But you're left with a choice, aren't you? And Jesus says, will you trust me, or are you going to continue to worry? Don't worry just about the small stuff, but he says, don't worry about the big stuff. In verse 28, he says, and why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They don't even labor or spin. Now, what's he say about clothes? Well, I think clothes speaks of the covering, how we present ourselves, the things that we say are just the essential. Jesus actually said in this passage, who of you by worrying can add an extra hour to his life? And so Jesus is referring to the issue of life expectancy. That's the big thing. When life is all over, when it's all wrapped up, if it's like the games that we like to play, and our family is a family that loves table games, when it all goes back in the box, what really matters at that point? We have many personal things that cause us to worry. And Jesus says, who of you by worrying can add even the extra hour to your life? We exercise, we eat carefully, we supplement our diets with vitamins, we get regular checkups and do countless other things in order to add a few extra years to our lives. And no doubt that we can improve upon the productivity and quality of our lives, but none of us can change God's plan for our lifespan. Dr. Charles Mayo of the Mayo Clinic has said that you can worry yourself to death, but you can't worry yourself to life. Worry affects the circulation, the heart, the glands, and the whole nervous system. Dr. Charles Mayo said that he had never met a man or woman who had died of overwork, but he had known a lot of people who had died from worry. Well, what about you? Are you worrying about the big stuff, the small stuff, or what about even the little in-between stuff? Jesus doesn't leave it there. He talks about some of those little things, the things that come and go, but at the moment cause incredible stress. For some people, the question is not, is there anything to wear at all? But the question is, what can I wear? And in a fashion-conscious society, Jesus seems to be saying to all of us, don't sweat even the in-between stuff. Don't sweat what it is you're going to wear. Did Jesus care about fashion? I don't think he really cares a whole lot, or he cares a whole little. But he's saying the sum total of who we are is not to be tied up in what we wear or what we don't wear, but rather it's in knowing the fact that we are loved by God. Jesus is saying if God clothes the lilies of the field with beautiful but short-lived beauty, he is going to provide for you as well. And he says, stop worrying over all this stuff. I want to leave you with a couple things that God wants you to know and he wants you to do if you want to deal with the problem of worry. I'm convinced some of you listening today, you really struggle with worry. It's really hamstrung you. It's left you in handcuffs and probably impacting a lot of relationships. Jesus tells us out of this passage, he says that we're to rest in him. You see, there's a relief, a sense of rest that comes when you're in God's presence. It's saying, Lord, here I am. I'm handing this matter over to you. And then he says over again, he says, don't worry when by nature we want to worry. Stop what you're doing right now. Jesus said that it's in his presence is fullness of joy. At his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. I want to tell you how I stop worrying. You know how it is? I simply get on my knees and say, God, here's the matter. I want to give it to you. You might call it just psychosomatic, but I'm going to tell you something powerful, something miraculous happens when I get on my knees and I pray. Say, God, here's the matter. And then I need to obey him. Jesus said that instead of worrying, we need to seek first his kingdom. That means to seek first his rule, his will, and his authority. And seeking God's kingdom is losing ourselves in obedience to the Lord, in the extent that our primary concern is to pour our energy into the work of the Lord. Now, that's something that you haven't heard me say yet on this program, but I want you to think about this. Could one of the reasons that you worry so much is that you're obsessed with yourself when God's calling you to live a bigger picture, to live a larger life, to give yourself in the pursuit of something that's of lasting importance and greater importance? And his greatest invitation is one that he extends to all of us when he says, come to me, all you that are weary and burdened down with the cares of life. And here it is. I will give you rest. If you want a smile on your face, you want the glow of happiness to exude from you, give to Jesus what you cannot keep to gain what it is that you cannot lose. Give him your life today. He invites you. to stop worrying and start living with Him.
Thanks, Mike. I love what you said, that the sum total of worth is not to be tied up in these things of the earth. That's exactly what Jesus was referring to, that if our identity is something and more, if we actually can embrace and understand the love of Christ, that we can live life without anxiety, fear, and worry. You've been listening to Find the Way. You can find us at findtheway.faith. Please join us online, sign up for Mike's Minute, and be fueled throughout the week with inspirational thoughts each day. Next week, we're going to be joined by Dr. John Radford, who's going to be speaking on conflict and relationships. So thank you for joining and for listening all the way from Victoria to Winnipeg. We'll be back next week.
Ooh.